guys, what's up? It's Debbie, and I am back with more True Crimes of Criminal Minds. You guys, this one has been a really tough one to put together. There's so much information on this guy, and it just goes on and on and on. And there's things that I'm not clear on, that I'm confused about. And this is maybe like the fourth time I've started trying to record this because I keep getting confused. If you've never been in my channel before, welcome. What I do is I look at an episode of Criminal Minds, and then I talk about a true crime case that was mentioned on the episode, similar to the episode, or the episode was based on the crime. To my returning viewers, I love you guys. Thanks for coming back every week. I appreciate you so much. So today we are talking about season 2, episode 18 of Criminal Minds, and it is called Jones. And this episode is about a Jack the Ripper copycat. This week's episode is one of my favorites, and it's not because of like the actual episode, the actual case. It's because this is the episode where JJ meets Will. They go on to live together, have a son, get married, and have another son. And the boys on the show, her boys on the show, are her real life sons. Mackay plays Henry, and Phoenix plays Michael. I've already told you one spoiler. I don't want to spoil the whole episode, so I'm not going to tell you the other one. Just that the unsub is a Jack the Ripper copycat, but I'm not going to tell you who it is, in case you haven't seen the episode. So, today I'm talking about Jack the Ripper. And there's a lot. There's a lot. So this is going to be in 2 parts. From April 3rd, 1888 to February 13th, 1889, in Whitechapel, London, 11 murders of women were committed. Whitechapel was an overcrowded, impoverished section in London's East End. Whitechapel and Spitalfields were known as the Red Light District. There were 62 brothels and over 1,200 sex workers. Authorities and historians agree that Jack the Ripper only killed what is referred to as the canonical 5. But we really have no way of knowing. Some historians think that the 2 murders prior to the 5 were also done by Jack the Ripper, and some historians think that after the last one, it wasn't the last one, that he actually did another one. But we have no way of knowing because he was never caught. We don't know the motive. We know nothing about him except vague descriptions of him from people that saw a man with the woman right before they died. These 5 have the same MO, which was to slice the throat and then mutilate the bodies, concentrating on the female organs. And there was no SA in any of these 5 murders. So a little background on Whitechapel and Spitalfields in the East End of London. After the assassination of Russian Tsar Alexander II, Jewish families immigrated to England to avoid anti-Semitic persecution. There were also a large number of Irish immigrants due to the famine in Ireland at the time. Their end goal was to go to the United States. Whitechapel was near the London docks, and these people would move there, try to save up enough money for transportation to the United States. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of work or lodging due to the overcrowding. Most of the poor living in Whitechapel and Spitalfields lived in a doss house. Doss houses were places for people to sleep and eat. They were also called flop houses. They would pay for a bed every night for a very small amount of money, and there were no private areas. Like, they didn't have a personal area anywhere. It was a room full of cots or coffins, and there was a communal kitchen. So sometimes they actually slept in coffins. They were called coffin beds. And a lot of the people that slept at these doss houses were alcoholics, sex workers, criminal. And many of the women who were sex workers, they would go out to work to just get money for a bed for the night. And unfortunately, sometimes they would use some money for more alcohol, and then they would just stay out all night, working, drinking, and never getting up enough money to pay for a bed for the night. The first murder attributed to Jack the Ripper of the canonical five is Mary Ann Nichols. She went by Polly. Polly Nichols was 43 years old at the time of her death. She was born Mary Ann Walker on August 26, 1845 in the East End of London. On January 16, 1864, she married, and her husband would go on to have 5 kids. The marriage broke up in 1880. Because they were still married, her husband paid her an allowance of 5 shillings a week, but refused to pay her anymore after he found out that she was doing sex work to supplement her allowance. On August 30th, 1888, Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly, was seen drunk at 2:30 a.m. She had been to the Frying Pan Doss House, but didn't have money and was turned away. Doesn't that sound like a quaint little name? Frying Pan? But it's a Doss house. I don't think there was anything quaint about the Doss houses back then. When her friend saw her at 2:30 in the morning, she tried to get her to go to a Doss house with her, but she replied that she had earned her Doss money 3 times over, but she had bought alcohol with it each time. So she was going to stay out and work a little bit longer and try to keep the money for the Doss house. At 3:35 a.m., her body was found in Bucks Row by cart driver Charles Allen Cross. He then called over another cart driver, Robert Paul. They didn't want to touch the body to see if she was dead or alive, so they just went in search of a policeman. But while they were gone, a policeman actually found her body. She was dead with her throat cut with 2 deep cuts all the way down to her vertebrae. Her abdomen had been sliced open, revealing the intestines, but nothing was removed. Her dress had been up around her waist, but Charles Allen Cross put her dress down when he found her. There was no assay to the body, but she was stabbed in the vagina. Police investigation was totally different back then. They had no forensic evidence. Even if they had DNA, there was no way to test it. They couldn't even lift fingerprints back then. They had none of the modern forensics that we have now. And when Polly got to the mortuary, they threw her clothes away, which nowadays would have been kept for evidence, and they washed her body. The police surgeon stated that she had been dead less than half an hour, possibly still alive at the time she was found by Charles Allen Cross. A week later, on September 8, 1888, Annie Chapman would be the next murder. Annie Chapman was born Eliza Ann Smith on September 25, 1840. She married John James Chapman on May 1, 1869. They would go on to have 3 kids. The oldest, a girl, died at the age of 12 from meningitis. Her youngest, a boy, was born crippled, and she started drinking after the birth of her son. They separated in 1884 due to her alcoholism. He retained custody of the 2 kids, and he had to pay her 10 shillings a week. But he died on December 25th, 1886, and she no longer received an income. So she crocheted flowers to sell, along with antimacassars, which are like the pieces of fabric that you put like on the back of your chair or the arms of your chair to keep like from your sweat or oil from your hair staining your furniture. And crochet flowers and antimacassars were not bringing in enough money, so she did casual sex work to supplement. Her friend Elizabeth Stride last saw her standing outside 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, at 5:30 a.m., talking to a man wearing a deerstalker hat and a dark overcoat. Now, a lot of people, when they picture Jack the Ripper, they picture this guy in a long black cape with a cane and a big old top hat, like somebody going to the opera or something, like. And I think this is why we think of him this way. Although a deer stalker and a top hat are two totally different types of hats. But she described him as shabby genteel, which meant like his clothes, like they were good quality clothes, but they were old and worn. Elizabeth heard the man ask Annie, "Will you?" To which she replied, "Yes." Her body was found by the resident that lived at 27 Hanbury Street at 6 a.m. And what woke him up was he heard a woman say, "No, no," and then he heard something hitting up against the fence between number 27 where he lived and number 29 Hanbury Street. Like Polly Nichols before her, her throat was cut through with 2 deep cuts down to the vertebrae. Her abdomen was cut open. Flesh from her abdomen, small intestines, uterus, and part of her bladder was removed. Police surgeon Thomas Bond said that her lungs and brain membranes were in such an advanced state of disease that she would have been dead in a matter of months. There was one suspect at this time, and they called him Leather Apron because he wore a leather apron. So what else are you going to call him, I guess, if you don't know his name? His real name was John Pizer, and he was a Polish Jew. He was a leather shoemaker, and he would extort the sex workers by threatening to kill them if they did not give him any money. So I guess he wanted to be a pimp instead of a shoemaker. I don't know. Whatever. But they arrested him on September 10th. But he had an alibi for the time of the murders, and they had to let him go. 2 weeks after Annie Chapman's funeral, on September 25th, 1888, the Central News Agency received a letter. This letter came to be known as the Dear Boss letter. It was written by someone taking responsibility for the murders. It read, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a little more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Don't mind me giving the trade name. And at right angles to the main text was a small note written in red pencil. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. So Jack gave himself the moniker Jack the Ripper. However, a lot of historians believe that this was a hoax written by a journalist to increase newspaper sales. The letter was forwarded to Scotland Yard. The next 2 murders became known as the double event. Elizabeth Stride, the last person to have seen Annie Chapman alive, was next. She was born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter in Sweden on 11/27/1843. And I apologize, I'm sure I butchered that name. Gustafsdotter. After her mother's death, she used her inheritance to go to England in February of 1866. She married John James Stride, a ship's carpenter. He was 22 years older than her, and they ran a coffee shop together until their marriage broke up. The marriage had deteriorated, but they still lived together until 1877. John sold the coffee shop in 1875. And they permanently separated, and then John died of tuberculosis in 1884. She was seen on September 30th, 1888 at 11:45 p.m. kissing a man in a doorway. He was described as being 5'5", in his 30s, wearing a black suit and a bowler hat. A witness also saw her at midnight being pushed to the ground by a man. Thinking it was just a common domestic dispute, he dismissed it. However, there was a second man there as well. This whole thing, remember I said some things confused me. This whole thing is just weird. Like, and why are so many people out late at night? Anyway, the person that was with Elizabeth Stride saw that there was a witness, and he called out Lipsky. And Lipsky was an ethnic slur for Jewish people. And the origin of that was someone named Israel Lipsky was hanged for poisoning a pregnant woman. And he was Jewish, so anytime you said Lipsky, it was like a Jewish slur. So at that point, after he yelled Lipsky, the witness left the area. But he said there was a second man there that was smoking a pipe, and that man followed him, theoretically to see if he was going to go to the police and say anything, I guess. But they checked the smoking man out, and they didn't find any reason to arrest him. He was cleared. Her body was found at 1 a.m. in Dutfield's yard. She was found by Louis Damschultz, who was the steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club, which was a Jewish club in Whitechapel. Her throat was cut with a single cut. She wasn't mutilated like the others. When she was found, she was still bleeding from the neck wound. Her hands were cold, but her body was still warm. Historians believe that Jack the Ripper did not finish with Elizabeth Stride because he was seen by a witness. Either that or it was the work of a different killer, because she just had her throat cut. He didn't have time to do his thing that he did with all of them. But less than 45 minutes later, the body of Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. Now, remember I said this was the double event? This is the only time that two women were killed on the same night. And because Elizabeth Stride was not mutilated, everybody thinks he got interrupted and then went somewhere else and found another woman. So, Catherine Eddowes' body was found in Mitre Square. She was born on April 14th, 1842. Her parents died when she was 15, and she and her siblings were sent to a workhouse for orphans. She had a relationship with a man named Tom Conway, but they never got married. She called herself Kate Conway, though, and they had 3 children. She started drinking, but Tom did not drink at all. He was a teetotaler. He didn't drink any alcohol, and that broke up their relationship. By 1870, the quarrels became violent, and she was seen by several people having bruises. She left him in 1880. Her throat was cut ear to ear, almost decapitating her. Her abdomen was torn open, and her intestines were removed but left at the scene. Her left kidney and major portion of the uterus was removed. Her face was mutilated. Her nose was severed. Her eyelids were cut. Her ears were severed. And a triangular piece was cut out of her cheek. And in the Dear Boss letter, he says that he is going to clip off a lady's ear. And that is why I think it was an actual letter from Jack the Ripper and not a hoax. But that's just my personal opinion. It could be totally wrong. Later that night, a piece of bloodied apron thought to belong to Eddowes was found on Goulston Street. And above the little piece of apron was written on the wall for everyone to see in chalk, "The Jews," spelled Jews. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Because of the spelling and grammatical errors, it was thought to be written by an uneducated person. It was also thought to be planted there to make people think that the murderer was Jewish. And Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the graffiti washed off before dawn in fear of anti-Semitic riots. They just did not know how to preserve evidence back then. The Queen Victoria herself believed that it was a butcher or cattle drover from one of the cattle ships that docked frequently at the London docks. They would dock there on Thursday and Friday and leave on Saturday and Sunday. The dates of the ship movements, though, didn't match up with any of the dates of the murders. On October 1st, 1888, the Central News Agency got another letter, a postcard, actually, and it was called the Saucy Jack postcard. It read, "I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number 1 squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Had not time to get ears off for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Signed, Jack the Ripper." The police were checking out all leads, no matter how unlikely they were. All surgeons, butchers, slaughterers, and physicians were interviewed. In all, 2,000 people were interviewed, about 300 people were investigated, and about 80 people were detained. At this time, Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews from Scotland Yard joined the investigation. George Lusk, a decorator and builder whose specialty was music hall restoration, founded the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It was a group of local businessmen and other lay people who felt like the murders were hindering or hurting the businesses in the East End. So they paid for an independent private investigator with their own money. They also put up £50 as a reward, and they petitioned the government to give them more money to make it a substantial reward so someone would come forward and they could figure out who was doing the crimes. They would also patrol the streets of Whitechapel at night. In October, George Lusk received a letter with a small package attached. It was called the From Hell letter. The package had half of a human kidney in it. It read, "From Hell. Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you, t'other piece I fried and ate, and was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if only you wait a while longer. Signed, catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." The kidney was examined by Thomas Bond, who said that it could not belong to Eddowes. Her left kidney had been removed, and this kidney was a left kidney, half of a left kidney. And the kidney that was left in her body was in worse condition than the half kidney that was sent to George Lusk. So they concluded that it was not from the same person. In 1931, journalist Fred Best claimed that he and a friend sent the letter signed by Jack the Ripper. The Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jack postcard were both signed Jack the Ripper, and the handwriting was similar. The press and police received hundreds of letters, either hoaxes or people giving useless tips. And I don't think there's a way, we're never going to know. We're never going to know if any of these letters were actually written by him. But the Dear Boss letter has cemented the name Jack the Ripper into our history. The last canonical victim was Mary Jane Kelly. Now, not much is known about her. There's no like documents and stuff like there were with some of the others, you know, when they were born, when they got married, how many kids they had, that kind of stuff. There was not that stuff with Mary Jane Kelly. What we know about her are really only the things that people said that she had told them about herself. She was born in Limerick, Ireland, and her family moved to Wales when she was just a child. When she was 16, she married a man named John Davis in 1879. He was a coal miner and he died in an explosion 2 or 3 years later after they married. After her husband's death, she met 2 French women that got her position at a high-class brothel. She became one of the favorite girls there, and one of her clients, Frances Craig, took her to France with him, but she didn't like it there, so she moved back to London a couple weeks later, living in the East End. But she would start to refer to herself as Marie Jeannette, which is the French form of Mary Jane, even though she didn't like France. Like, what's up with that? Anyway, Mary moved to the East End of London where she met Joseph Barnett. Never married, but they lived together at 13 Miller's Court in a 1-room apartment. They were on again, off again, and they would get into drunken fights frequently. He didn't like her doing sex work. One night, she wanted to have a friend of hers to stay in their room with them, and she was another sex worker, and he didn't want her there. He didn't even want her to be friends with Mary. Like, he didn't want her to be a sex worker. He was fed up with the whole thing, and Mary insisted that her friend stay, so Joseph left. She threw something at him, but it missed, and it broke the window. So after that, sometimes in the window would be a men's jacket to cover up. I guess when her Johns came over, she put the jacket up over the broken window for privacy. Also, Joseph would come back to visit. He never stayed there again permanently, but he would go back to visit. On the night of November 9th, 1888, she went to the 10 Bells pub with her friend Elizabeth Foster. And then later, she went to the Horn of Plenty pub with 2 acquaintances. Her neighbor, Mary Ann Cox, saw Kelly returning home drunk, accompanied by a stout, ginger-haired man. He had a thick mustache, blotches on his face, and he was carrying a can of beer. Did they have canned beer back then? I don't know, but it says he was carrying a can of beer. Mary Jane told her friend, "I'm going to have a song." I have no idea why she wanted to sing. But anyway, she sang. So her friend, Mary Ann Cox, who was also a sex worker, she left around midnight to go to work, and she heard Mary singing. When she came back at 1:30, she didn't hear anything. Total silence. Mary Jane Kelly was behind on her rent, and her landlord sent his assistant, Thomas Boyer, to collect it. There was no answer, so he noticed the broken window and he reached in and unlocked the door. And Mary had lost her keys, so that was how she got into her room as well after the window was broken. He found her on the bed. The blood was all over the room, everywhere. Walls, ceilings, everywhere. She was mutilated beyond recognition and completely hollowed out. Her organs were ranged around her on the bed, and her heart was missing. That's the canonical 5. That's the story of Jack the Ripper's murders, and like I said earlier, these 5 are considered to be his victims due to the similar MO, but there were other murders at that time and never solved. So we have no way really of knowing which were done by Jack the Ripper or which were done by someone else. And this case has so much information. There's still a huge interest in this case. People that are still trying to study the case and determine who Jack the Ripper was are called Ripperologists. There are many, many theories about suspects, and that I will get into next week because some of these suspects didn't even become suspects until after their death. And there are people that will pay millions of dollars to analyze the evidence, little as it is, and try to figure out who Jack the Ripper was. So next week is going to be pretty interesting. So you guys subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and then you can watch part 2 of Jack the Ripper. Happy Thanksgiving to all my American friends. I got to get up and start cooking in a minute. This is so much more fun than cooking, but I hate to cook. I hate to cook. Have a great time of love and laughter with your family. Watch some football. Try not to eat too much. And remember, be kind to people, love your family, and Jesus loves you. See you in the next one. Bye.